Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly blockchain gaming roundup. Check out all of our weekly content on blockchaingamer.biz and follow us on Twitter at BCGBiz. Today is Friday, the 20th of October, and I'm your host, Jenny Jordan, and with me is co-host John Jordan. Getting confused there. Identity more.
Hello, John. How are you?
Thomas Cole. Hi, John. How are you?
I'm good. Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. Got a new hat, I should say. Probably one of my favourites so far. Well,
talk us through the hat. There was an actual process involved.
I'm not really sure. I've got, yeah. So
yes.
I bought it off base.
Yes.
Base. But I had to bridge some ETH to base.
Base, yeah.
Is that right?
We did.
But then go on Zora and mint the NFT.
Yeah.
Which is for the hat, but then use that as a token to have the hat sent to me, physical hat, from an NFT that I owned.
Yes.
Is that right? Not That's quite right. Amazon Prime sort of service yet, but
it actually arrived pretty quickly, didn't it? I thought
the delivery wise, it was all right. The process of getting there was a little bit complicated.
We didn't have anything because we didn't have any ETH on base, and actually it was fairly expensive as a hat, wasn't it? So
turned out sort of $40. I think that's rough, like standard.
But because we didn't have any assets on base, we had to do the whole bridging thing, which was a bit of a
worth it though. Worth it for this.
It was good, good experience. I've not used Zora for a while. And it's sort of interesting how and you can see how in general how the physical and the digital to physical thing, having an NFT and then sort of burning that to get the physical thing.
And just a good experience to go through. I think the more you sort of experiment and go through these processes, the more confident you get. And absolutely. Anyway, let's kick off the week with some news. We've had 3 investment news this week. One is by the climate change focused blockchain game Seeds, which announced 1 million seed round. But that was in conjunction with also launching the game on the app stores. That round was actually led by like a German TV show, like the panelists on it, I believe.
It's like Dragon's Den.
Like Dragon's Den, yeah.
Shark
Runs on
Tank
the Flow blockchain.
Yeah.
As does the Formula E high voltage game that launched this week, Animaka Brands and Amber's racing car collectible game, also on Flow. Anyway, next investment was Darewise Entertainment, Animaka owned French developer who is working on their life beyond metaverse, PC based. And they announced a couple of weeks back or months back, I can't remember, that they were building a new economy based on Bitcoin, weren't they? And then now they've raised money sort of as part of that scheme. So 3.5 million for a pre-sale. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. And then we had the sort of bigger investment announced this week, which was 11 million for this gaming hub Forge, which is it's blockchain. This was funny because it's clearly blockchain-based rewards for gamers for their participation in games and their contributions to the gaming community. And they're working with 6 blockchain games. That's sort of the initial launch partners anyway. But nowhere in the press release does it mention blockchain or Web3, to your amusement. But can you tell us a little bit more about this platform, their history? They used to be working on something else, weren't they? And now they raised this 11 million for this current project they're doing, which is clearly
it's sort of it's sort of a tailor-made investment press release for me to get stuck into because it's sort of, peculiar is the wrong word, but it's nuanced, it's sort of complex in lots of different ways. So I guess the starting point is that the guy behind it, so there's actually 3 founders of who are involved in this company, a US company, and one of them is actually the co-founder of Crunchyroll, which is a sort of well-known anime platform. One's involved in he was involved in a sort of just a sort of a cyber risk sort of security company, and I guess the one who's best known is called Dennis Fong, who's really well known. Sort of, he was one of the first sort of celebrity gamers. He was sort of a little bit before esports, but sort of the time esports started out. So he's called his gamer tag is Thresh, and he was I think it was sort of sort of the Quake games, may have been Counter Strike as well, because everyone played Counter Strike. But he was sort of one of the first ones, like 20 years ago, to be like a celebrity for playing games. And since then he's become a bit of an entrepreneur. He started sort of several sort of companies. And he does a lot of angel investment. He's also involved with Bitcraft, the big gaming VC, who actually led the round in Forge. So it's all, from that point of view, a little bit sort of insular, I suppose. But then the other interesting thing is these three guys have another company, which I can't remember. Is it GGWP, or I can't remember its letters?
Like that, yeah.
So they originally started this other company that was looking at online toxicity. So looking at how you make a platform for gaming communities where you sort of have some sort of reputation systems, and if people are sort of being nasty and saying nasty things, or being nasty when they play games, then those people sort of you can sort of highlight those people in a don't play with them sort of way. So they're working on this, and that company actually has raised like $22 million or something over 3 funding rounds. The last one of which was actually announced only in July this year. So it's sort of a bit weird that these 3 guys started this company looking at this very specific thing. They actually raised from Samsung and a Korean telecoms company like $10 million. So that company seems to be going quite well. But then they've sort of, in that work, they sort of come up with this other idea, which is sort of like a gaming sort of identity platform. So similar, but not focused on this toxicity thing, which seemed like the other company was more focused on. And then they spun this new company, Forge, out of the old one. So it's a separate company, and the investment is, so they've raised this $11 million for investment in this new company. Confusingly, a lot of the investors are the same in both companies.
Yeah.
So it's a bit complicated to work out. And in an interview with GamesBeat, it also says the 3 founders of the initial company are working on the new company. So they're basically running 2 companies at the same time with sort of the same investors, sort of doing the same thing. And it just seemed a little bit like confusing in terms of exactly who was investing, how it all came together. I'm sure that'll work out over time. But then the other interesting bit was, if you look at the investors, so it's Bitcraft and Makers Fund, well-known investors, Animoca Brands, well-known in Web3, and then some other smaller funds, which are all Web3 funds. They only invest in blockchain stuff. But nowhere in the press release does Forge mention blockchain at all. So, but it's not, you don't have to be a great detective to sort of look at what's going on there and log into if you log into Forge, and it says, one of the things it wants you to do is connect your social. So connect your Discord, account, connect your Steam account, these sort of core gaming platforms. And so then it can sort of look to see what games you're playing here, how many hours have you spent on Counter Strike or whatever, and that's sort of how it's building the reputation. But the other things you can connect are your Ethereum wallet and your Solana wallet. So clearly, if you just log into it, the things go, got Web3, you can just see it's there. And then also, if you sort of knew what was going on, they announced 6 games that they were sort of promoting as they've sort of gone live with this press release. And those games include games like The Sandbox and Mojo Melee and Pixelmon and Web3 games, all of them. So clearly there was sort of, we see this quite, increasingly now that games or platforms that want to sort of get just normal gamers interested generally, are not very active about saying they're blockchain platforms.
Yeah.
Even if they are blockchain platforms, because they feel like, well, normal gamers are not going to want to get involved because they all hate NFTs, which may or may not be the case. I mean, we're not necessarily have that argument now. But it is sort of interesting where clearly Forge has a very strong Web3 component and is promoting Web3 games, but nowhere in the press release is that overtly sort of mentioned. So that's sort of, I guess, sort of funny from that point of view. The other thing is actually there's quite a lot of activity in this sort of space. So I think this is a good, this is sort of a good idea, but this is not an original idea because lots of guilds, lots of the active guilds like YGG have sort of moved into this space. Obviously, all the data on the blockchain is open, so anyone, there's quite a lot of sort of these discovery type, launchpad type sort of community websites where you sort of, they're a bit more Web3 focused, a lot of them. But there's that, and there's also this very similar sort of project called or app called it's a mobile app called Trophy, and I spoke to the guy behind that on my forthcoming podcast. So that's just launched in India. So that's very, very sort of similar. So there's lots of, it's a good idea. It's not a particularly original idea. So lots of people are doing it. So I guess it's a question of, if you are launching that sort of platform, how do you have competitive advantage when the sort of the idea is good but not very unique, and there's not, in VC space we say is there a moat, which basically means, if everyone has the same idea, how does your company grow and not the other ones? So I guess with Forge we sort of have to look to see, what their moat is. I don't really know at the moment, but it was interesting from lots of points of view.
You would think they know what they're doing, but it's kind of interesting, isn't it, to see whether, if all your launch partners are Web3 games that the Web2 community probably haven't heard of really, or heard of but not really, but you're trying to attract Web2 gamers by not mentioning blockchain, if that is the strategy. We're not sure why it's not mentioned that way, but
I would imagine the Web3 games would go like, Web3 games would go, we don't need you to bring us blockchain gamers. One, there's not very many of them, and two, that's what we do. If we're a blockchain game, if we're the Sandbox, we've Sandbox announced this week that it had 4.5 million registered users, or 4.5 million registered accounts. So the Sandbox is pretty good at going out and finding sort of people. That's probably the most of any blockchain game. Maybe Axie Infinity still around the same level, but for someone, I guess for a game like sort of Mojo Melee, they'll say, well, we got the Web3 guys because we're well known as a Web3 game, but can you get us 100,000 Web2 players who actually might be interested in playing the game, but wouldn't be interested if they knew it was a blockchain game? And so Mojo Melee is a good example because the blockchain stuff is quite in the background. There's not a token. There are NFTs, but you don't really sort of need them. They have non-NFT versions of those pretty much. So if going through Forge gives them another 100,000 sort of onboarded players, then they're like, great. Well, we'll sort of pay. We pay for that sort of marketing. But there is. I mean, I just kind of think there is sort of a tension you have where and then the thing Forge has is you sort of you get points for doing the things it tells you to do, like connecting your accounts, you get some XP, and then playing some of these games you get XP, and basically you level up in the game, and then at some point you level up within Forge, and at some point you can sort of mint a sort of founder's badge or something, which is an NFT, because you can people are trading them on OpenSea. So if you're a Web2 player, that's going to be a bit weird to go, your reward for doing all this stuff is you can mint an NFT, because Web2 players are going to go, I hate NFTs. That's the last thing I want to do. So there is a tension there. Maybe there is education part, which I know you want to discuss as well, because you've been interviewing people about sort of blockchain education. So I can see why in the current environment Forge has taken this approach. I don't think it may not be the approach that I would do if I was running that company, but I don't think it's an illogical approach. But clearly at some point you have to, there is a tension there which has to be sort of sorted out, I suppose.
Because obviously one of the advantages of a blockchain game is like a decentralized economy, player-based economy, and if players aren't aware of that in the game, then what advantage do you have from using blockchain or building on blockchain? Then if you're not using that to market your game as such, it could be potentially quite difficult to get players on. And actually, like you said, we did have on Maven's feature this week on this topic about player education and whether gamers need to be educated about the benefits of blockchain games, or whether we should just leave that topic sort of for gamers to work it out themselves. And will that happen then just naturally through gamers getting sort of offered better quality blockchain games, and sort of the process of them discovering sort of the benefits themselves rather than having. And it was a wide range really of answers. They didn't all agree with each other. I thought,
it was interesting that sometimes you ask Maven questions and you can just tell people are not very bothered about the question, or there's sort of a reluctance in the group to sort of discuss this. Whereas in this one, like everyone had a it was obviously a question they thought about, because everyone immediately said, "I know what my opinion is on this question." So you had a lot of responses, and as you say, they were quite varied depending on sort of what the project was and sort of what sort of attitude it had.
Yeah. Anyway, check out the Mavens for all of those to get a deeper insight into what the industry leaders think about this topic. In other news this week, we've had quite a focus on fully on-chain games, and the very first interview actually at the start of the week was with Dragon's developers, the former Neopets creators, and they are making this big adventurous MMORPG, which will be coming out maybe sometime end of 2024 or early 2025, so not anytime soon. But it's a fascinating idea they've got. They've actually had this idea for Dragons when they developed Neopets. Didn't work out, and then they had a second go through the Meteor, is it called Meteor Game Studio? Didn't turn out that way either, and that's why they looked into blockchain, and that was sort of their way of being able to fulfill their entire game idea. They looked into this already in 2014, going on Ethereum, but for various reasons they couldn't do that, and that's led them to build on ICP, Internet Computer, which has got quite a few games, I think, at the moment in the sort of catalogue.
But it's not
hear about them more.
It's not a high-profile chain, though, is it? I mean, I think that's what was interesting. Obviously, because the Dragons, the two founders, did Neopets, a massive, big, sort of a gaming franchise. So they sort of know what they're doing. But it's sort of interesting when people who have a lot of experience in the games sector then sort of choose something different from other people. So and they'd be interesting to watch. And the other interesting thing was I guess they've been quite successful off the back of Neopets, so it seems like they're funding it themselves. So there's no sort of VCs involved, so they have very much the control to what they what they want to do.
Yeah, they're very focused on games not being profitable, but like all the money going back into the ecosystem, and to be able to sort of make sure that happens, the less sort of overheads you have, the better, kind of thing. And you've been talking to Proof of Play's CEO, Amit Mahayan, is that how you say it? And about not only about their game Pirate Nation, which is fully on-chain on Arbitrum Nova, but sort of about the whole tools and their entire on-chain development.
Yeah, no, it's been a very on-chain week, not only your hat. So it was it's interesting. I mean, he's again someone who's been in the space for a long time. He's sort of an entrepreneur. He's done investment. He's done various sort of things. I guess best known for being effectively the co-founder of what became Farmville, so like a massive social media game for Zynga. He had a company that made a game called My Mini Life, I think it was called, and that sort of became and Zynga bought that company, and then that sort of became sort of Farmville, and then he was involved with a bunch of the other sort of Cityville games and all that sort of stuff. So he knows how to make sort of massively successful games. I think, what did he say? 1 million people, billion people played that game? Can't remember. A lot of people played that game, hundreds of millions at least. And so from his point of view, when it comes to blockchain, which he's sort of been interested in, he actually set up an NFT marketplace, sort of competitor to OpenSea called Rarebits that he folded in the end. But he's like, I know how to make games. I know how to make games companies. Do I just want to make another games company just using sort of NFTs, which would be maybe what we call Web 2.5, charitably or not? And he's very much like, no, that's really dull. That's really boring. I want to make something where, everything's on chain, 100% on chain. All the assets are on chain. and more importantly, all the game logic. So basically what happens in the game, those are all smart contracts. In his case, running on, as you say, Arbitrum Nova, an Ethereum L2. And his point of that is that's really flexible to me. Make games, I can make games much faster. Once I've made my first game, and have all my assets there, then I can do versions of that game. So I don't think he's doing this per se, but as an example, he was saying, I've got this Pirate Nation game, and I could, you could take your pirate and put it in a game called Ninja Nation, and he could become a ninja, or the pirate could be in the ninja world, and then it could be space world, or it could be, So once you create these assets, then you can very quickly sort of create other experiences, and that sort of becomes then, he didn't really want to use the term metaverse, but from one sense, he's saying, like lots of people say, this is like our Marvel Cinematic Universe. Once we make one game, the next game, they're both in the same running the same assets, running on the same chain. So you sort of build these things out. And most interestingly, I think for a lot of these people, it's sort of like, and if you do that successfully, you get enough people, then because it's all on chain and permissionless, then anyone can start messing around with it, and anyone can start taking those assets and making their own weird games. And building their own front end.
Weird games. I'm sure I didn't say that. Game experiences.
Well, that's one of the point. I mean, it's like, if you look at the big platforms, Roblox being the sort of big example, I suppose, where, I mean, I'm not a big user of Roblox, I'm sort of wrong age group, but, there are some great, polished games in Roblox, but the majority of that is just 13-year-old kids messing around with the templates and making, what are technically terrible games, but their free friends love playing around with them, and that's why Roblox gets into so much trouble, because anyone can pretty much make anything. So you can make any horrible, nasty, political, whatever. We won't go into all that, but so there is, these things cut both ways. But when everything's sort of on chain, then everything's sort of linked together, and you sort of build this community, and they're using the same assets, and they have the same market, and you sort of are allowing people to build a new way of gaming. So you could sort of argue, well, Roblox allows you to do that, but there is permissions within Roblox, and the sort of Roblox takes quite a big chunk of any money that's created in there. Whereas on a blockchain system, you might still have the developer taking some sort of fees in there in the smart contract, but it's much more open and equitable. And I think that's why, I wouldn't say a lot, but certainly the people who like on-chain games, or some of the sort of deeper thinkers in the game space, they don't want to make just this is a game with some NFTs in it. They go, the full value of this is, as everyone said, why aren't you making games that you couldn't make without blockchain? And you could argue, maybe a game with an NFT is a game you couldn't do without blockchain, because the NFT has to be owned, on a public blockchain. But certainly, if you're making a game where everything's on the blockchain, there is no servers, everything's running on chain. That's a new way of doing things, and that will actually be a way of building new experiences. So I think that's why he was very excited about that, and various other people who came up with a top 10 on-chain game feature, which is really good. And there are lots of people taking their own different sort of view on what a fully on-chain game means, but most of them are doing that not because it makes it easier to make their first game, but because they think in the long term they want the community to be able to have a lot more access. And
no, I think it's quite the opposite, actually. Sorry to interrupt you there, but the impression I've been getting from interviews and hearing these developers talk is that it's actually really, really difficult and complicated and challenging, and they've had to scrap everything and start over, and they're not making it easy for themselves. They're not doing this because it's sort of the lazy way out of making a game, but they are so driven, aren't they, by the groundbreaking sort of power of this and the future prospect of it, that they could not take the opportunity of sort of doing it and furthering the technology around it.
And I think that's been interesting. I mean, I guess the one example I've sort of seen quite close up is we've mentioned him quite a bit. He's been on my podcast, David Amore from Playment, and he started out very much like 2 years ago, even 3 years ago. I'm going to make a mobile game with some NFTs, and every time I spoke to him particularly over that year and since, he's sort he's gone further down I do a bit more stuff on blockchain, and suddenly now he's like a degen on chain. He's very evangelistic about it, about how this is what this is what gaming is in the future. This is what it is. This is,
But he is also very much like, well, everything else is boring, so why would you?
No,
and he's got a good point there.
So
if it doesn't motivate you as a developer, so why would you keep doing it? You're not going to make a good game then, are you? So.
No, and it is much harder in terms of, it's much harder to, I think, to work out how the money works. Creating a bunch of NFTs and selling them has been very successful for some game developers, not clearly at the moment. But with the fully on-chain stuff, it's sort of like, well, how's that actually going to play out? Which is why you tend to find a lot of those people are not very well funded, or they're very well funded, experienced people like Amit and David and people like that. So,
yeah, and interesting, those two examples we just said, like the Dragons team and the proof of play. They've also got this experience of having made games in the past where the servers have shut down and the players have been left, without anything really. So that's an aspect of building fully on chain, an advantage of it as well. That's maybe not emphasized enough. The only developers and people who have been through it will see the advantage there.
Yeah. I mean, it said, can't remember when it was, 2020 or something. Zynga switched off the servers for Farmville. All that, probably, the reason they did it was clearly because people didn't really care anymore. So it's not like there are lots of people crying their eyes out because their Farmville, farm didn't exist. But equally, probably some of them were just like, well, I maxed this out. I remember I met my husband or wife playing Farmville. There's always those sort of stories, and just in general, there's hundreds of millions of people played that game and had built something that they'd put some sort of creativity into it, and if you're getting the ability to keep that alive on chain for free, then that would seem to be at least one advantage.
Absolutely. Well, that turned out a bit longer than I'd expected, but that's fine. We're going to close on that note, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.